Imagine a nation where the weight of economic despair crushes the spirit of its people, where the simple act of buying bread becomes a symbol of systemic failure. This is the Iran of late 2025 and early 2026, a country teetering on the brink of collapse, not from external invasion, but from the internal rot of decades of mismanagement. As Americans, we often view such upheavals through the lens of distant news headlines, but let's pause and feel the human cost. Families watching their savings evaporate as inflation soars beyond 50%, the rial currency plummeting to record lows, making everyday life a battle for survival. It's not just numbers on a screen. It's mothers skipping meals to feed their children, young graduates staring at a future devoid of opportunity. This economic crisis didn't erupt overnight. It's the culmination of years of sanctions, failed policies, and a theocratic regime more focused on ideological purity than practical governance. The protests that ignited in late December 2025 weren't born from abstract political theory. They were fueled by raw, visceral pain, the kind that turns quiet discontent into roaring defiance. Analytically, we must dissect the economic triggers with a clear eye. Iran's economy has been battered by a perfect storm: sanctions and global oil price fluctuations. The rial's collapse, losing over 70% of its value in the past year alone, has driven hyperinflation, with food prices tripling in months. Official figures admit to 40–50%, but independent economists peg it closer to 100% in urban centers like Tehran and Isfahan. This isn't mere statistics. It's a domino effect where subsidies on essentials like fuel and bread are slashed, sparking initial demonstrations. Protesters are decrying a system where the elite amass wealth through shadowy conglomerates while the masses suffer. Emotionally, it's heartbreaking to think of the youth, Iran's largest demographic, robbed of their dreams. Over 60% of Iranians under 30 are unemployed or underemployed. That spark came in December when fuel price hikes coincided with corruption scandals, igniting the most widespread uprising since 1979. As we delve deeper, consider the geographical scope. Protests in all 31 provinces, from Tehran to the remote borders of Balochistan. This universality shatters the regime's narrative. Shared suffering has united them under slogans like woman, life, freedom. Picture the faces: women defiantly removing their hijabs, men linking arms, children holding signs pleading for a better tomorrow. These aren't professional revolutionaries, they're ordinary Iranians, teachers, shopkeepers, students, pushed to the edge. The regime attempts to frame them as foreign agents, but leaks from within the IRGC reveal internal memos acknowledging the protests' organic roots. For U.S. audiences, this resonates with our own history of fighting tyranny. We see echoes of our values in their cries for freedom. Shifting to the emotional core, let's humanize the spark. Consider Reza, a Tehran mechanic who joined the protests after his daughter's education fund vanished. Reza's tale is one of quiet desperation turning to bold action, marching with thousands, chanting "Down with the dictator," only to face tear gas and batons. Analytically, this personalizes the macro trends. The World Bank's reports show a Gini coefficient worse than many developing nations. The top 1% controls over 40% of wealth. Quasi-charitable foundations siphon billions, funding luxury lifestyles for the elite. Protesters target these symbols, burning effigies of leaders whose vast empires stand in stark contrast to the poverty below. Emotionally, it's infuriating. How can a leader who claims divine mandate ignore the pleas of his people? Yet, analysis demands balance. Not all oppose the regime. Pockets of support remain, often bolstered by state media propaganda and coerced rallies. But even here, cracks appear. Defections from Basij militias, with some leaking orders for violence. These defectors are heroes in the shadows. As we wrap, reflect on the uprising's evolution, from economic grievances to existential demands for regime change. It's about dignity. For U.S. viewers, this is a call to empathy. As the protests swept nationwide, the regime's mask slipped, setting the stage for the chaos to come. The night of January 8, 2026, will forever be etched in Iran's collective memory as the moment when peaceful pleas turned into a bloodbath. As the internet flickered out across the nation, a deliberate blackout imposed by the regime to blind the world and its own people, the streets became arenas of horror. Security forces, once content with rubber bullets and water cannons, escalated to live ammunition, machine guns mounted on vehicles raking through crowds with indiscriminate fury. Emotionally, it's gut-wrenching to envision. Young protesters, arms raised in non-violent defiance, cut down in hails of bullets, their bodies crumpling like discarded rags. Hospitals, overwhelmed and under-resourced, transformed into makeshift morgues, with doctors weeping as they treated warlike injuries. Eyewitness accounts describe a chilling shift around midnight. Orders from high command, allegedly signed by Khamenei himself, authorizing lethal force to crush the sedition. For Americans watching from afar, this evokes the darkest chapters of history. Kent State magnified 1,000-fold, a regime turning its guns on its citizens. Analytically, the Blackout is a tactical masterstroke of repression, severing communication lines that protesters used for coordination via apps like Telegram and Signal. Iran's internet infrastructure, controlled by state monopolies, allows for such total shutdowns, a tool honed in previous uprisings like 2019's fuel protests. Yet, this strategy backfires. It fuels international outrage and forces reliance on clandestine networks like Starlink terminals smuggled in by dissidents. Emotionally, think of the isolation. Families unable to check on loved ones, protesters navigating darkened streets without maps or warnings, the fear amplified by silence. The IRGC and Basij, numbering over 200,000 strong, form the regime's blunt instrument, trained not for defense, but for internal suppression. Leaked documents reveal training manuals emphasizing psychological terror alongside physical force, including public executions to deter participation. Diving deeper into the human toll, arrests have skyrocketed into the tens of thousands, with detainees crammed into notorious prisons like Evin. Charges of enmity against God or corruption on earth carry death penalties, expedited in kangaroo courts without due process. Emotionally, it's devastating. Imagine parents receiving a midnight knock, their child dragged away for a social media post, never to return. Rights groups like Amnesty International document cases of forced confessions under duress, with some prisoners executed within days. Analytically, this judicial overreach signals regime panic. Historically, such mass trials precede collapses, as seen in the fall of the Shah or Gaddafi's Libya. Funerals, meant for mourning, become flashpoints. Crowds gathering to bury the fallen erupt into chants of "death to the dictator," prompting authorities to ban gatherings. Smuggled morgue footage shows horrors. Bodies piled in bags outside overflowing facilities, relatives searching desperately amid the stench of death. For U.S. audiences, this mirrors our own struggles with police brutality, but on a genocidal scale, challenging our complacency about global human rights. The regime's countermeasures extend to propaganda and coercion. State TV broadcasts staged rallies, portraying the protests as foreign orchestrated riots. Analytically, this narrative crumbles under scrutiny. Satellite imagery from firms like Maxar shows sparse attendance at these events compared to organic protests. Internal cracks are evident, defections from mid-level IRGC officers, some fleeing to Turkey with documents exposing Khamenei's direct orders for violence. Emotionally, these leaks humanize the oppressors. Not all are monsters. Some are conscripts torn between duty and morality, whispering apologies as they fire. The Blackout hasn't quelled the spirit. Underground networks relay messages via couriers, and protests persist in pockets, adapting with hit-and-run tactics. For Americans, this resilience inspires, reminiscent of our revolutionary forebears evading British redcoats. Yet, analysis reveals vulnerabilities. The regime's over-reliance on force erodes loyalty. Reports of unpaid BCG salaries spark murmurs of discontent. Emotionally, the cost is incalculable. A generation scarred, trust in institutions shattered. As protests wane in visibility due to repression, the embers smolder. This part underscores a grim truth. For every bullet fired, a seed of resistance is sown, pushing Iran closer to a tipping point where brutality alone can't sustain rule. In the fog of repression, truth becomes the first casualty. But the numbers scream volumes. Thousands dead, a nation bleeding out under its own government's heel. Official Iranian acknowledgements hover around 2,000, 3,000 fatalities, including security personnel, a figure laced with self-serving minimization. Rights organizations like Harana counter with over 2,500 confirmed protester deaths. Then come the harrowing estimates from CBS News and Iran International, 12,000 to 20,000 slain, drawn from leaked morgue data, anonymous medical sources, and satellite-verified mass graves. Emotionally, these aren't abstract digits. They're lives extinguished. For U.S. viewers, this scale dwarfs our own tragedies like 9/11, evoking a profound sorrow mixed with outrage. How can a regime slaughter its people en masse and still claim legitimacy? Analytically, the disparity in death tolls stems from the Blackouts veil, limiting independent journalism. Pre-blackout videos captured snipers on rooftops picking off protesters, but post-January 8th, verification relies on smuggled evidence. Hospital leaks describe industrial-scale casualties, emergency rooms triaging like battlefields, surgeons amputating limbs shredded by high-velocity rounds. Doctors recount treating children with gunshot wounds to the head, protesters dying in agony without painkillers. Beyond deaths, the atrocities compound. Thousands arrested face torture, electric shocks, rape, mock executions. Enemies of God trials, lasting minutes, result in death sentences, with public hangings broadcast as warnings. The regime's denialism, blaming armed rioters or foreign agents, crumbles under evidence. Leaked IRGC orders, authenticated by cybersecurity experts, authorize unlimited force, implicating Khamenei directly. In historical context, this crackdown signals endgame desperation. Regimes resorting to mass killing, like Assad's Syria or Maduro's Venezuela, often prolong agony but invite collapse. As casualties mount, the world's silence becomes complicit, urging action beyond words. This part lays bare the human cost, a testament to resilience in the face of unimaginable loss. The world watches Iran burn, and the responses range from thunderous condemnations to calculated maneuvers, with the U.S. at the forefront under President Donald Trump. His January 2026 announcement of a 25% tariff on nations trading with Iran, targeting China, Iran's lifeline for oil sales, escalates economic warfare, potentially crippling Tehran's revenue by billions. Emotionally, Trump's rhetoric resonates, urging protesters to keep going and take over institutions, promising help is on its way. It stirs hope among dissidents while infuriating the regime. For American audiences, this bold stance echoes Reagan's Cold War defiance, positioning the U.S. as a beacon for the oppressed. Analytically, the tariffs bite deep. China, importing 500,000 barrels daily from Iran, faces a dilemma: defy the U.S. and risk trade war escalation or pivot suppliers, isolating Iran further. U.S. military posturing, heightened activity in the Gulf, discussions of cyber ops or strikes from bases in Saudi Arabia, signals non-kinetic pressure, avoiding boots-on-ground quagmires. Internationally, voices amplify. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz's declaration that the regime is in its final days and weeks underscores eroding legitimacy, a government sustained by bayonets alone. The UN's condemnations, while toothless without enforcement, rally global opinion, with calls for special rapporteurs on human rights abuses. Emotionally, this solidarity uplifts. Protesters, glimpsing foreign support via smuggled news, find renewed vigor, chanting in English for Western ears. Yet, analysis reveals fractures. Russia and China veto UN Security Council actions, viewing Iran as a counterweight to U.S. influence. For Americans, this highlights geopolitical chess. Iran's proxy wars via Hezbollah or Houthis threaten allies like Israel, making the uprising a strategic opportunity to weaken a foe without direct conflict. The crisis's fluidity poses risks. Escalation could spark regional war, with Iran threatening Strait of Hormuz closures, spiking global oil prices. Emotionally, the uncertainty terrifies. Will defections cascade into civil war, or will repression prevail? Leaks suggest internal rifts. Khamenei's health rumors, successor jockeying among hardliners. Protests, though subdued, persist underground, fueled by economic despair and grievances against theocracy. Analytically, sustainability hinges on factors like oil revenue, down 60%, and military loyalty. Basiji defections indicate fraying. Future scenarios range from negotiated transition, unlikely, to violent overthrow, with diaspora Iranians in the U.S. advocating for support like funding opposition media. For U.S. viewers, this is a moral imperative. Our history of aiding freedom movements, from solidarity in Poland to Ukraine, compels action. Trump's cancellation of Iranian meetings and vows of aid align with this, but caution against overreach. Emotionally, the protesters' courage inspires. Women leading charges, youths facing tanks unarmed, a reminder of humanity's indomitable spirit. As mid-January 2026 unfolds, the regime clings by force, but pressure mounts. This part envisions a path forward. International isolation accelerating change. U.S. leadership pivotal. Iran's future hangs in balance. Will it emerge freer, or descend deeper into darkness? The answer lies in collective will, a call for Americans to stand with the brave.